A painting by Chardin. Chardin is a classical artist. Classical artists, as opposed to romantics, are concerned with simplification. They're trying to achieve as much as they possibly can with a minimum of means. Their color tends to be muted. Their forms tend to be highly simplified and drawing close to geometric solids like cones and spheres, cubes. They just don't elaborately develop texture and detail. Their principal concern is the most generalized, simplified form in a simple light. And this was at a time when the art of his day, of Chardin's day in the early 19th century, was said to appeal to the court, to Versailles, to a bunch of frivolous men dressed up almost like women, and women undressed almost like animals. I mean, they were having a wonderful time out there. And Boucher and Fragonard were painting all of these young beauties with their bare backsides shining in the light, and Chardin was doing these humble, quiet studies of middle-class housewives and their children and still lives. And oddly enough, as out of step with his time as he was elected the head of the Academy. He was a very famous and successful artist by virtue of the fact, presumably, that the quality of his work was so outstanding to be powerful, engaging, and winning. He's doing a study of a mother presumably preparing her daughter to go out for a walk or shopping, and he wants to celebrate the warmth and closeness of this relationship between mother and child. So he's put them in a container. He's put them in a pyramid. He's put them in a triangle. All of that fits perfectly. You've been drawing triangles in bottles. Now we have a triangle. We could turn it into a cone, but let's leave it at that. We have a dominant vertical in this design, and it's coming right through here. And it coincides with this point, and this, and this, and the mouth and the eye, and where this change takes place here. It hits probably the toe. It's the strongest vertical in the whole program. That doesn't mean there aren't other verticals. There are dozens of other verticals, but this is the principal, this is the dominant, this is the most important. The horizontal, I would have said, would be the ground plane here, and it coincides with her foot and this and the bottom of that and the bottom of this settee or ottoman. But there are other horizontals running through as well, and this coincides with this muff, and it comes through to the top of that triangle, and it's not hitting anything in particular there. The dominant diagonal in this scheme is this, and it's repeated here. You see it. And it's repeated here. It's repeated here. And this coincides with that. It should be parallel. It's coming through here. It's coming through here. So it coincides with that. We can take that through. This is coming down. This is almost there. It's not quite. Then we're running a diagonal in this direction as well. But this one is the dominant. This one's carrying the load. This one is repeated most often. Do you see it? So we have a rhythm going here. The spaces between these diagonals, between these verticals, are called intervals. And they're intended to be read as a rhythm. Chardin is striving to introduce a heartbeat into his work. He wants rhythm. He wants echoes. He wants things that we associate with sound. The gazing direction in this piece is to our left. So everything is moved a little bit to the right to accommodate all of this activity. And I mention this because we're going to shortly design a still life with our 3 bottles, and we have to account for gazing direction. There are enclosures in this. An enclosure is a curved line like this that reaches out and holds other elements. Can you see it? It links other elements. These are all enclosures. Even the negative spaces have enclosures. So these are all enclosures. And the way they connect and the way they flow give us movements that are intended to move our eyes around the composition, to keep us enclosed within this rectangle. Nothing really is passing outside. All around the edges, things are kept very quiet. This dissolves into a value that's almost the same all the way around. All of this gets darker as it gets to the edge. We call this the vignette, the outer edge. And we don't want hard contrasts, strong shapes on the edges because they draw our attention away from the main subject. The negative spaces here have been very carefully designed. The most prominent of them is this. This is played against that curve. That diagonal's echoed here. This diagonal's echoed here. We have this diagonal. We might assume it's there, and that's echoed. So we're coming across here with a series of directions which are going to have a relationship one to the other. We have verticals at this point. We have this coming here. Again, it's related, and this is echoing that. This is a negative shape, and it's pretty much played against that, and all of these elements coincide. This is a weak negative shape, but that's what this one's doing. But again, this is the dominant. Our eye is drawn to that, and it's beautifully designed. So everything has its own shape, whether it is a positive form like the child's head or this left out space, the English call it the left space, with nothing in it. So let's look at some other design elements. Here's a Juan Gris. Now the thing about much recent art, and he would be early 20th century, companion of Picasso and Braque. He became a disciple of the Cubist movement. Here, his gamut, remember I said a gamut was a limited number of directions that an artist uses in a composition. Doesn't matter what it is. So he has the vertical, a few horizontals, and they're not very important. And for the most part, they're relatively small. And these 45-degree diagonals. Now this isn't 45, but he's bringing that 45 against this. And he's setting up rhythms all the way across. You see how he is. And he's not using anything more than that. Now, in my view, this is a very unsuccessful piece. It's a very suitable example to show beginning students to illustrate gamut, a limited number of directions, and a limited number of values. Because what Juan Gris has done here is he wants to reverse the figure in the ground. If you look at the lights, they come forward, and this becomes the far distance. You look at that, it jumps ahead of the white, and the white goes back. So he's interchanging background and foreground. That gives him another movement back and forth. This gives him a diagonal that leans in this direction. This gives them a diagonal that leans in that direction. If you look at this, things are falling this way. You look at this, things are falling that way. There's a good deal of dynamic and movement in this. And there's also this business of the reversal of background and foreground, which means we get an advancing and receding alternately of darks and lights. I want you to close one eye and bring your finger down from above and cover that. Your thumb is good. Bring it in close. Close one eye. Oh, that's a much nicer piece. Keep looking at it. Don't take your hand down yet. That is a much nicer piece. In a moment, I'm going to say remove your finger, and you're going to do it now. Look at that vertical jump forward and destroy everything. You see, my criticism here is it is not organic. It has no business here. The verticals play almost no part in any of this. To bring them in suddenly out of character into such prominence is to violate the unity of everything else. So when I criticize your work, I'm trying to do so, first of all, without committing character assassination or humiliating you in front of the group, because I figure that every one of you want to see what's right and wrong so you can clarify your understanding of what's going on. So this is an excellent example to demonstrate how to organize a limited number of directions and values, and also how to avoid violating the integrity of a scheme. This is an early Renaissance piece, and you can see how the angle of the nose connects with every angle of the nose. The angle of the forehead connects with every forehead. So too to the details in the castle on the outside and the clouds. The chest and the ear does as well. This is called a coincidence. Again, it's the artist's attempt to generate a rhythm. You're going to find the angle of the neck and the headdress and necks from nose to chin are also going to be running parallel to things in the background. A limited number of directions give you power that you don't have if you use every one of the 360 angles available to you. Had a young woman who worked for a local industry as a photographer. She had gotten an undergraduate degree in art and then a graduate degree from a Canadian university in photography. And she came to me and she said, I don't ever want to see a machine-made object again as long as I live. I did not go to art school for 6 years to photograph manufactured goods, and I'm going to throw my camera away. And I said, please, Linda, don't. When you come through drawing one, I'm going to ask you to please use your photograph to do all of the assignments. So I want you to draw them, because that's what you're principally interested in doing, is returning to your art. But I don't want you to abandon your camera. So she came in with this collection of bottles, and if you look at them, you know, if these three people showed up dressed like this, hoping to gain entrance to some social affair that you were sponsoring, you wouldn't let them through the door. They've got nothing in common. They're garish. So I rejected them. And she came back the next week. I also wanted her to paint them all white. She came back the next week, and I said, Linda, this is very much better, but there are some problems. And by bringing your attention to her problems, I hope to awaken you to things you don't want to do when you do your still life. So I said, Linda, we have to be very careful about shapes. And you have a shape here that is stronger and more varied than any of the shapes in your still life. It has no order. The negative shape in the Chardin was designed. This is chaos. It's an accident. It's not considered. I said, that's not very good. Notice I'm being very, very considerate. Then I said, you don't want a descending line to fall on a bad point on a horizontal. You want it to fall in the third, in the half, perhaps on the golden section. So if you bring it in like this, that would be a suitable place for that bottle to descend and hit. Do you see it? I want you to suddenly pay awfully close attention to intersections of lines. They matter. They matter enormously. You're going to see how much they matter the next time you go to the National Gallery, the Metropolitan, or the Philadelphia Museum of Art. You're going to see how everybody's concerned. So we have a horizontal here with a bad intersection. Horizontal here with a bad intersection. That one I commented on. I said, I'd rather you didn't have that descending line connect with all of these points, or this one connect with that point. Because one of the devices you have at your disposal for suggesting depth is overlapping planes. And if you bring one in that coincides with another, you don't know whether it's in front or in back. You violate its chance for some existence in space. So that's not good. As for the rest, it's terrific, okay? I didn't like the cast shadow of this bottle on that, and you will try to avoid that sort of thing all semester with me. Well, she came in later and things looked much better. I liked the parallel diagonals. I liked this relationship. I was a little worried about that negative shape, but I didn't say anything because she was very bruised. This wasn't as good as it could be. It's close to that. This is a much better intersection. I thought it was improved. And now she's starting to become engaged. Now she's starting to become interested. Remember, she didn't want to do any photography. That line descends, it connects with this handle, it comes down here, it comes around this, it swings through here, it returns through this, and it comes up here to return to that. It is gorgeous. If you had a photograph of this in your home and you had it beautifully mounted and matted and framed, it would give you an enormous amount of pleasure. Well, it was giving her a lot of pleasure. Suddenly, she was looking at photography very, very much differently. Very much differently. But she did get angry at me, and I thought that was tasteless and rude, all right? We got to the sphere problem, and now she's designing everything in a sphere, and she's also coming from back to front to forward and linking it in the three-dimensional ellipse. Do you see it? It's becoming very much more sophisticated, and she now owns 475 white objects that she can arrange, all right? So it really becomes very much more interesting, doesn't it? She said, Myron, it took hours to do these. The subtle adjustments of looking at the ground glass. I said, welcome to the real world. This is what photography is about. And when you look at the work of somebody like Cartier-Bresson, he's got a 35mm camera tucked in a pocket, talking to himself and saying, this is good, this is good, this is good, as he watches something start to move, and suddenly he sees in a second it's going to be a photograph, and he takes the camera and goes, click. He's got a masterpiece. The guy's a genius. He talks about the decisive moment, when everything in nature that's moving gels, and suddenly you have a composition, and all the parts work. We'll look at some of his work later. So you get the idea. Linda now, when she leaves this course, will ask Daddy for some help, and she will spend the next year in India with a camera. But you can see she really did accomplish a great deal in a relatively short period of time. But we've been able to touch on some ideas of composition, so let's look at what we have ahead of us. There are no straight lines in nature. None. But artists need them, which is why you have to make your way into this world of pure design and imagine the existence of straight lines. This is an arabesque. A draftsman has taken something suggested by nature and with French curves and rulers designed something that is full of movement and harks to naturalism, because what we saw in the first slide was the propulsion of some mollusk in the sea. And this was the shape of movement in the water after they propelled themselves forward. This is from a book on organized chaos by Rudolf Steiner, who's a brilliant writer and founder of many schools, art schools universities. He was a scientist. He was a master, a genius in about 9 disciplines. And this was called Sensitive Chaos. And it gives you some idea of movement in nature, and then man's attempt to stylize movement in nature. And then an artist like Egon Schiele, who usually is exclusively concerned, or principally concerned with the figure and cityscapes, gets a bunch of broken pots and sets them up on the floor, presumably. And he's arranging them to create as many relationships as he can. He's got this fluid movement coming here, and it's connected through the bottoms as well. It looks almost like a reverse curved wall. Can you imagine that this could come like this, and then it could come like this, and then it drops back, and then it would come here. Do you see it? And what we would have would be this kind of a reverse curve. And this is the movement that he's playing with in this particular situation. And he's interested in design. He's mesmerized by design. Every figure he ever drew was exquisitely designed on the golden section. He's a master designer, and he died a very young man, tragically, from the flu epidemic. Now he arranges them in a different configuration, but he continues to play with them because they interest him. Now these required preliminary drawings, formalized analysis on the golden section, refinements, exaggerations, adjustments. These are works of art. These are not photographs. And then I believe he settled for this, which I believe is the cherry on the top. This is the one that wins the prize. This is the best in the series. So I thought we might look at it. There's a relationship between this and this and this bottle. Do you feel it? And it's coming through here as well. There's a relationship between these and that. There's a constantly changing arabesque running through this. And this is coming through here, and this is coming through there, and this is coming through here, and this is running through all of this. You begin to see how this sweeps through there as well, and this comes through. This kind of activity is going on underneath the surface. It's a very busy scheme. There's a lot of activity. He's taking this group, and these tops fall into line, and this becomes a unit moving this way. This becomes a unit moving that way. So he has these interlocking walls. Do you see them? Coming through like this. There's a movement in 2 directions. There's a tension created between them. His dominant direction is this diagonal. And it's picking up all of these coincidental points. And it's running all the way through everything. You can see all of this working its way through and coinciding and hitting all of these points. Do you see what's going on? He's also playing with this direction and this to that to here, and this is connecting with that. This is connecting pretty much with this. This is the same angle running here. He has horizontals, he has verticals, and he has a variety of other directions. This is a very sophisticated, beautifully refined piece that looks so elegant and simple when you first saw it. It didn't look in the least bit complicated. But it is a complicated and beautifully orchestrated game. We use a boar skull here for students to do this particular assignment for their portfolios. In the first instance, they analyze and measure the boar's head. Then they triangulate it, because it's full of triangles. And then they come in with enclosures and arabesques and curvilinear elements and demonstrate that there are innumerable ways to render anything, and it just depends on what kind of a system you adopt because of your personal preference, appetite, or interests. So it's all wide open to interpretation. There are so many different approaches to solving the problem. Giorgio Morandi is an Italian 20th century still life painter. As a young man, he was initially involved with the futurists, Baccioni and Balla and those fellows. And he suddenly had an insight and decided that he really wasn't interested in any of the things that they were saying, and he was interested in the purity of design. He spent his whole life painting a few objects like those that Linda chose to paint white and photograph. I often run across paintings that artists do that seem to summarize all their training and imply that having done this so well, I'm going to do my own thing from here on out, but I'm proving to you that I fulfilled all of the requirements. You can't fault me in the future for failing to really learn to draw, design, and paint. So this is very academic, and it's very carefully designed, and I think very self-consciously so. So here we have our dominant diagonal. Hits that point, hits here, coincides with all of that. Our dominant horizontal is running through here. Our dominant vertical, quite clearly, is falling there. And it looks to me as if that's the square. Is that a square? This piece, I can't see it from where I am. Yeah, measure it, tell me. No? Not a square. All right. So we have a series of vertical intervals in the center of all of these objects and on the extremities. This coincides with that, etc. So we have a whole field of verticals. We have a whole bunch of horizontals, and we have all of these arabesques. You can see how we do have. All of this is flowing through, and this is coming through here and around. It's full of activity, but it's very measured. And he's very concerned with the composition in a classical sense. He's going to remain concerned with design, classical design, but he's going to reveal that he has a wonderful sense of humor, and he delights in breaking all of the rules. Certainly the rules I laid down for you in a foundation drawing course. And later in his career, he'll be doing this kind of a still life. I don't want you to have lines that coincide with 1, 2, and 3 objects because they flatten everything out. He says, so what? I want it flat. I don't want you to have dark objects on a light ground that frame a negative space that throws it forward. And then you say, but that's not a forward-moving element, that's the background, so it reverses the way Juan Gris reversed. And then I don't want all of these to be on a common line either. That's terrible. And this is worse. And what about that? They all hit. My God, that's vile. So he's breaking all the rules, he's flattening everything, he's distorting and twisting and having a perfectly wonderful time. And every time he changes this, which should have been an ellipse, to a straight line, he hits that point, and he will hit that point. This is not a straight line. This is coming up to there. This jogs this way and that way and that way. And they go different places. And it's all calculated. He develops pieces that are absolutely charming. And his color is muted, but rich. And his designs are great fun. This is in all yellows except this muted violet. So it's in the key of violet. All of these yellows make that neutral violet look more powerful than it would otherwise do. He's really very clever, and he knows what he's doing. But Villon is only using straight lines, and this is the first step in an etching. And it shows you how artists think. Certainly Morandi's grids would have looked like this. Powerful drawing, and he's a cubist, and somebody I greatly admire, Morandi. Pardon me, Villon. This is Christopher Parrott, a student who presently is exhibiting in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Fay Gold Gallery. He had a big one-man show in February. This he did when he was with us. And I very often in the figure drawing class give this assignment where I want an emphasis on verticals. But it means that verticals are going to be forced where they don't exist in an effort to get the vertical intervals to read. So you see, this becomes a discipline. Again, a means of training the eye of the designer, draftsman, painter, so that he begins to see. And this you'll see quite frequently during the course. It's a very early drawing by the architect, Rudy Ellert, who 7 months later, and probably 45 self-portraits later, produced that powerful thing from that beginning. So my belief is that given a person of average intelligence, they can do anything that anyone else of average intelligence can do, and they can be taught to do it extremely well. So if somebody wants to learn to draw and they're prepared to do the homework and suffer the criticism, they will learn to draw, and they will learn to draw very, very well. This is an extremely accomplished self-portrait. And this is Mondrian. Again, modern artists tend to show you what in the past was hidden. I always imagined that great artists, when they died, went to hell. The notion of sitting around in a white outfit with a harp strikes me as boring. And I don't think they would have liked that very much, so I'm sure they're in hell. And for any of you who remember Hess's department store here in Allentown, there's a nightclub in hell called The Patio. And it's a copy and a dead ringer for The Patio from Hess's. They even have the multicolored sugar in this patio. And all the artists of any importance are there. Picasso, Morandi, Leonardo, they're all sitting around joking and talking about art. And when Mondrian shows up, they'll welcome him. And they'll say, you know, you got away with murder. You let all of the devices that we hid show. And you made a feature of what we couldn't allow the public to see. But we understand what you are doing, and we are jealous. And Leonardo would probably say, yeah, and boy, I wish I'd had a Mac or a laptop back in the 16th century. I mean, he would have had dozens of computers. You can imagine he would go crazy with all that stuff. But there it is. It's all hanging out. Everything I told you artists have been doing, Mondrian allows to stay in the surface. And here, Anastasia Alexandrin had a one-woman show here when she was a senior in Emmaus High School, and you can see she's very much influenced by Morandi, and she's orchestrating vertical intervals. And this is a modern English painter, Ewan Uglow. He died a couple of years ago, and he's having a perfectly wonderful time in the key of orange. So your key color is the minority entry. It's the soloist. You don't compete by putting in other warm colors. These, of course, are yellow, and then he's using all of these blue violets and some very low-intensity red violets. And it's very formal because it's centered the way it is